Crimewatch. 4 True Crime Stories by Liz Mills. Read by Sue Cook. A Murderer's Game. The production office of Crimewatch UK, a monthly television programme that regularly draws an audience of 11 million people, is large, open-plan and modern. It looks out on the traffic jams of Westway, one of the main highways leading into London. For part of the month, the place is tranquil, as directors and researchers are out of the office filming on location. But as the night of the programme approaches, the office is crowded. Presenters and the production team huddle over their computers, tapping in the scripts. Researchers telephone police incident rooms to verify details of cases new and old. Filmed reconstructions are previewed, edited and scripted. On Thursday, 20th of February 1992, the Crimewatch studio was tense. The programme had been approached by the Assistant Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police and asked to make a special appeal to assist its search for a killer. This is the story of a man who committed one of the most chilling series of crimes of the century. It began in Leeds, West Yorkshire, in the summer of 1991. Julie Dart was born in Leeds on the 1st of March 1973. She was an attractive girl with long dark brown hair. While she was still at school, she met Dominic. They became engaged when Julie was 17 and moved into a flat together. Their relationship lasted 3 years. Julie then moved back home to live with her mother, Lynn, towards the end of 1990. At the time, she was unemployed. One evening in May 1991, she went to a club in Leeds and bumped into Dominic. They started seeing each other again. Julie told her mother that she had got a job at Hazelton Laboratories, a research establishment near Leeds General Infirmary. She didn't mention that she was seeing Dominic again, as Julie had once hinted that he was violent towards her, and Lynn wanted her daughter to have nothing further to do with him. So when Julie went out for the evening and didn't come home, she would claim that she'd been with a girlfriend. On Tuesday the 9th of July, Julie and Dominic were together at his sister's house. At about 7:45 p.m, Julie said that she had to go to work. She called Dominic later that evening, around 9 o'clock, to tell him that she'd be spending the night at home. Julie had rung her mother that afternoon and explained that she'd be working until 11. She added, "If you want to go to bed, you can, but leave the door open." These were the last words that Julie spoke to her mother. When Julie didn't appear the next day, Lynn Dart wasn't unduly alarmed. However, when 2 days had passed and there was still no sign of Julie, she became very worried. On the morning of Friday, the 11th of July, Dominic received a letter. It was from Julie. It began, "Hello, Dominic," and continued, "Help me, please. I've been kidnapped. Please go and tell my mum straight away." The letter contained a direct appeal for her mother to phone the police and was postmarked 7 p.m. Huntingdon. Before Dominic was able to reach Lynn, she had tried to contact Julie at work, but of course no one at the laboratories had heard of her. Lynn went straight to Gipton police station, near her home, and reported Julie missing. Coincidentally, that same morning, Friday the 11th of July, the police had also received a letter postmarked Huntingdon, and because of its content, had sent it on to the Vice Squad at Chapeltown police station. It read, "A young prostitute has been kidnapped from the Chapeltown area last night and will only be released unharmed if the conditions below are met." The writer demanded a ransom of £140,000 and gave strict instructions about how the money should be bundled up. Fingerprints taken from the letter sent to Dominic and from Lynn's house established that it had indeed been written by Julie, although much of its content and language were provided by somebody else. Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor, who was put in charge of the case, decided that the police must move quickly to raise the money demanded by the kidnapper. The operation began. 5 days later, on the Tuesday evening specified in the ransom letter, a woman police constable was in place at a Mercury phone box at Birmingham's New Street station when the phone rang. She picked it up, but the line went dead. She waited for 20 minutes, but when nothing happened, the operation had to be abandoned. On Friday the 19th of July, the police began to prepare a press statement. Little did they realise, though, that as they were doing so, nearly 90 miles away in Lincolnshire, a farmer had discovered a body. The next day, Saturday, Lincolnshire police circulated the information to all forces. Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor was working that weekend and rang the Lincolnshire incident room. A post-mortem had already been done, and fingerprints from the body were compared with those of Julie Dart. They matched, and by 5:30 p.m. the police had a positive identification. Preliminary examinations did not reveal a certain cause of death. The pathologist recalled there were some injuries to the skull consistent with being caused by an instrument such as a hammer, but they were not convincing causes of death. He gave the earliest possible time of death as sometime after 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 10th of July. The sheet and rope wrapped around the body provided two important clues. Tapings from the sheet revealed a number of extraneous fibres, in particular yellow wool and brown nylon fibres that seemed to have come from a mustard-coloured carpet. The rope was an unusual colour, and it too bore fibres similar to those found on the sheet. 3 days after Julie's body had been found, on Monday the 22nd of July, the police received another letter. This one carried a Leeds postmark, and the envelope was marked Re Julie Dart. It began, "Words will never be able to express my regret that Julie Dart had to be killed." The letter went on to describe precisely how Julie had been murdered, yet this information had never been released to the press. There was no doubt now that the writer of the letters was the killer, and the police felt sure he could kill again. The murderer continued, "I still require the same monies as before under the same conditions. If you want to avoid serious fire damage in any other prostitute's life, to contact me, place an ad in the Saturday's Sun newspaper personal column." 3 days after the advertisement appeared in the Sun, another letter came, postmarked York, 29th of July, 1991. It acknowledged that the ad had been seen, warned that another hostage would be taken, and set another date for the handover of the money. It also told police to expect a phone message at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 30th of July at a public phone box at Leicester Forest East service station on the M1. The police again followed the instructions carefully, but unfortunately when the message came through on the phone, the courier could not understand it because of the noise of background music. The next day another letter was received, this time postmarked Coventry. It said, "No go last night, was not free Monday afternoon. Next week I will definitely be free Monday and Tuesday, so we'll have no problem with hostage or incendiary. Bye, ring Tuesday." On Tuesday the 6th of August, the police waited for the call, but it never came. Instead, yet another letter arrived, postmarked Nottingham. It said, "Could not make it Tuesday evening due to the fact that there was no suitable hostage in the Huddersfield red light area on Monday evening," and promised a further call on Wednesday the 14th of August at 8:15 p.m. At the appointed time, a WPC was again in place at Leicester Forest East. The phone rang, and a male voice spoke. "I am going to have to tell you where to go because my tape recorder's broken." The WPC listened carefully, then set off along the motorway towards the next rendezvous. As planned, the call came through. The man was brief. He said, "Hello, it's me again. Problems. I'll have to ring you back in half an hour." The WPC waited. At 10:30 the phone rang and she picked it up. But it just kept ringing. The cradle had jammed. The man did not ring back. However, the next day the police had another lead. A workman was collecting debris on the southbound carriageway of the M1 near the Barnsley turning at junction 37, when he saw a white-painted brick with an envelope attached to it and a cylindrical plastic container coloured grey and silver with two small red lights on the top. He was immediately suspicious and called the police. Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor recalled, "It soon became obvious that these objects were connected with our man, and when we visited the scene, we realised that this was where he had planned to get the money. He was going to stand on top of the bridge and lower a dog lead for the WPC to attach the bundle of money to. He was then going to haul the money up and make good his escape from the lane at the top of the embankment. On the 20th of August, the police received another letter. It was postmarked Grantham and dated the 9th of August, 1:15 p.m. It said, "Game is now abandoned. You will have to file your papers until I try again." The police now had a number of clues to work from. The white brick found on the motorway was extremely unusual, in that its dimensions did not conform to normal brick sizes. The suspect device found with the brick had been coated with an unusual silver paint. The other clues, apart from the forensic leads, came from the letters themselves. They'd been posted in Yorkshire and around the Midlands, so the sender obviously had time to travel, and several words were consistently misspelled. It was now the end of August 1991. The police were desperate for as much publicity as possible, and in mid-August they had approached Crimewatch and asked for a nationwide appeal. The time had come to pull everything together in a bid to flush out the killer. A full reconstruction was broadcast on the 12th of September. It outlined the last few days of Julie's life, described the clothes she was wearing, and appealed for anyone who had seen her to come forward. Finally, details of what the killer himself might be like were revealed to the public for the first time. As a result of the programme, a prostitute rang to say that she'd been with Julie that night in a pub called the White Swan, and that this was where she had made the call to Dominic. 2 more prostitutes were traced, and the police discovered that Julie had eaten a kebab with one of the girls and then gone off on her own. This was the last time anyone had seen her. Just over a month later, on Thursday the 17th of October, the police received another letter. The postmark was Huddersfield, and it began, "As you are nowhere near on my tail, the time has come to collect my £140,000 from you. I do not get any bigger sentence for 2 murders, and prostitutes are easy to pick up. On Wednesday the 21st of October, the same WPC will be at the phone box on platform 3 of Carlisle Station, bottom of ramp, at 8 p.m. for message recorded at 9:15 p.m. In fact, the 21st was a Monday. In view of this error, arrangements were made for the courier to be in place on both Monday and Wednesday, but nothing happened. Meanwhile, in London, a letter had been received by British Rail. It said, "Unless we receive a cash payment of £200,000, we shall cause the derailment of an express train." In the course of routine inquiries, the regional crime squad working on the Dart case contacted the Metropolitan Police and learned of the blackmail threat. The ransom dates coincided with those specified by Julie's murderer, and there were similarities in the letters. In the circumstances, the Metropolitan Police decided not to refuse payment, but to defer their operation for some days. However, the threat was renewed in another letter postmarked Nottingham. It stated simply, "Congratulations, you have now qualified for retribution." Nearly a week later, a broken concrete block, a piece of sandstone and some rope were found on a piece of railway track near Millmease in Staffordshire. Mercifully, they'd caused no damage to trains or passengers. As a result, Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor was put in charge of the British Rail blackmail case as well as the Julie Dart inquiry. He was quite unprepared for the next turn of events. On Wednesday the 8th of January 1992, a man calling himself Mr. Southall visited Shipways estate agents in Birmingham to collect property details. He later made an appointment with one of Shipways' employees, Stephanie Slater, to visit 134 Turnberry Road on Wednesday the 22nd of January. That morning, as Stephanie opened the front door of the house for Mr. Southall, she thought he looked anxious. He was wearing thick black glasses and had a badge with a train on it pinned to his jacket. He showed little interest in the property, downstairs or upstairs, but as Stephanie was about to make her way back to the front door, she heard him call, "What's that up there?" She saw him pointing at the bathroom ceiling above the bath. As she looked up at the ceiling with her back to him, she heard him say suddenly, "All right," in a deeper and harsher voice than he had used before, and Stephanie turned to find him standing with both hands raised and extended towards her. He had a knife in his left hand and a chisel or file in his right hand. A struggle followed, and Stephanie ended up in the bath. Southall tied her up and took her car keys from her coat pocket. Blindfolded, she was forced out of the house, down the garden path and into the garage, where he had hidden his car. The time was now 11 a.m. He started the engine, and the radio came on automatically to Radio 2. The car smelled of oil, petrol, and damp rags. They drove for about half an hour before the car stopped, and the man said, "We're going to make a tape for your boss. What's your name?" He ungagged her and got out a tape recorder. Stephanie repeated the message he had written for her. "This is Stephanie Slater. The time is now 11:45. I can assure you I'm okay and unharmed." The message went on to inform Kevin Watts, Stephanie's boss, that she'd be released if instructions were followed, that he would need an ordnance survey map, that he alone must act as the ransom courier when the time came, and must use his own car. Once the message had been recorded, the man got out of the car to telephone Shipways and to post the tape, together with a letter he had written. Back at Shipways, the call came through. The man's voice said, "Stephanie Slater, she's been kidnapped. There'll be a ransom note in the post tomorrow. Contact the police or anybody and she'll die." Kevin and a colleague went straight to the house in Turnberry Road. Stephanie's car was still outside, and Kevin saw the keys to the house on the floor. When he returned to the office, he telephoned the police. Immediately, a news blackout was effected, because for as long as Stephanie was held hostage, her life was in danger. A special tape recorder was set up to monitor incoming calls to Shipways, and at about 3 p.m. a call came through. It convinced everyone that this kidnap was no hoax. The message was simple. "Stephanie's dropped her keys in the hall, so go and lock it up." The final part of Stephanie's journey that day began at about 4 p.m. She recalls, "We travelled at around 50 miles an hour for at least an hour before I was aware of the car making a slight left turn off the road onto a dirt track. He got out, and I heard the sound of keys rattling and a heavy metal door being pulled open a little. I could hear a scraping sound, as if metal were being pulled against metal. The floor surface changed from loose dirt to stone. I walked for about 40 feet before being sat on a hard wooden chair. Then he said, 'We're going to have to change your clothes. I've got some others here for you to wear.' Stephanie was then handcuffed at both the wrists and ankles. Her kidnapper said, 'I'm going to put you in a box within a box, and that will be where you sleep. I hope you're not claustrophobic.' The box was a wheelie bin sawn off at the bottom and extended with a wooden box that he had made. Stephanie could not get into the lower half of the box without a great struggle. She recalls, 'I lay on one hip with the other pointing up and my knees slightly bent. Then he took hold of my wrists by the handcuff chain and tied it above my head to what I believe was a metal bar. The man said, 'Don't pull on the bar because there are boulders above you. If you pull on the bar, you'll pull them down and crush yourself.' Meanwhile, because the kidnapper had warned that there'd be instructions in the post, detectives got rare consent to intercept the mail for Shipways. The tape was found in the early hours of Thursday the 23rd of January, and later that day Stephanie's parents confirmed that the voice was indeed that of their daughter. Almost from the beginning, detectives were looking at possible links with other similar cases. Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor reviewed the details that had emerged. A neighbour had seen the man standing on the pavement waiting for Stephanie. She recalled that he wore a railway badge on his jacket and looked away when he thought he had been seen. Someone else had seen a red Metro revving up outside the house. This type and colour of car had been seen in connection with Julie Dart. The witness remembered that the man was in his 50s and about 5 feet 2 inches tall. The letter that the police intercepted with the tape was similar in several respects to the other letters received. On Sunday the 26th of January, a call came through to Stephanie's father, Warren, at 2:11 p.m. "Is that Mr. Slater?" asked a man's voice. "It is." "Just listen," the man said. Warren Slater then heard another voice, one that he recognized instantly. "Hello, Stephanie here. They've allowed me to make a message to you just to let you know that I'm all right. I'm unharmed. I happened to see West Bromwich Albion lose yesterday to Swansea 3-2. I'll always love you. Look after the cat for me. Now the police felt they had no option but to prepare a ransom. Stephanie's employers, Shipways, had agreed to put up the money. But the biggest dilemma was whether they should accede to the kidnapper's demand that her boss, Kevin Watts, should act as courier. Kevin was 34 and married with 3 young children. The police explained that his proposed role was a dangerous one, but he was determined to do the job. Everyone was gearing up to Wednesday the 29th of January, the day the kidnapper had demanded that the ransom be paid. That afternoon at 3:23 p.m, the phone rang at Shipways. A man's voice said, "Hello, Kevin Watts?" "Speaking." "Have you got it?" "Yes, I have," Kevin said. "Go to Glossop Station. There's a telephone box inside the entrance hall, and you'll get a further message at 7 o'clock. Kevin was now ready to begin his long and arduous journey. The weather had been horrific, dense freezing fog, and the drop was going to be in the dark. His car was fitted with a 2-way radio, and he had a transmitter. The microphone would relay his voice back to headquarters, so it was important that he repeated every instruction when he got it. Wearing a bulletproof vest, he set off up the M6 towards Manchester. The police teams were all on standby, ready to go at a moment's notice. Kevin pulled into Glossop Station and approached the telephone kiosk. The phone rang. "Kevin Watts," he said. The caller said, "Leave the station, go right down to the crossroads. You'll see a telephone box. Inside, you'll find a message underneath the parcel shelf which will contain instructions." Kevin walked out of the station. When he got to the phone box, he fumbled about looking for the note. Eventually he found it and read it out loud. Back at the control room, Detective Chief Superintendent Mick Foster was briefing detectives with a map. "He's been sent over the top of the Pennines to Yorkshire, just south of Barnsley. There he's to turn right onto the A629, where he'll find another message in a telephone box about 1.5 miles down the road." Kevin was told that he had to be at the next phone box by 7:40 p.m. If he missed the time, there would be a message waiting for him. It was now 7:30, and as he got back into his car, he knew that he was not going to make it on time. In fact, visibility was so bad that it took Kevin 45 minutes to get to his next destination. Finally, he reached the phone box. He found the message in a brown envelope and carried it back to the car. Again, he read it out loud. "This route will show if you're being followed." The note told him to turn around, then turn right 50 yards up on the right-hand side. Then turn left about 100 yards up on the left-hand side, down a bridle path. As he made the turn, the police lost all radio contact with him. The road was now just a dirt track. Kevin was frightened that the car might break down. As he drove, he was thinking aloud, hoping that the police could pick up exactly where he was. He'd been told to look for a red and white cone. By the cone would be a bag. The note told him to place the money in the bag. Kevin got out of his car, grabbed the bag from underneath the cone, and jumped quickly back into the car. When he opened the bag to transfer the money as instructed, he saw a stenciled message inside. It read, "Go to end of lane, turn left back to roundabout, A628/9, turn right, phone box 3.5 miles left-hand side, message taped under shelf, 15 minutes allowed." Meanwhile, Stephanie was waiting inside her coffin and beginning to get very worried. Her kidnapper had said that he'd be back between 8 and 9 p.m. He had left that morning at around 9:15. 12 hours later, the telephone still had not rung, and she had heard nothing. Kevin was driving slowly when suddenly, right in the middle of the pathway, he saw another cone. The stenciled message that was stuck to it read, "On wall by 4 sign, wood tray, do not move tray, sensor inside, put money bag on tray. If buzzer does not sound, leave money there. Remove cone from in front of car and go. Money will not be collected until you have left." Kevin recalls, "At the time I wasn't in control of my own mind. Once I'd placed all the money on the tray, I just wanted to get out of there. I learned afterwards that there was actually a message on the tray which I didn't pick up because I was in so much of a panic." The message told me to return to Shipways and wait for a phone call that would tell me where Stephanie was. After Kevin had dumped the money, he quickly drove out of the area, and the police caught up with him as he approached the main road. It was nearly 11 p.m. when Stephanie heard a car. She was frantic with worry and shouted out, "Did you get the money?" Her kidnapper replied, "Yes." He led her, still blindfolded, to a chair where she changed back into her clothes, then guided her into another building. She got into a car, and they set off. It was freezing cold, and after about 2 miles he put the heater on. As the rest of the team was alerted to the night's events, the family liaison officer, who was with Warren and Betty Slater, knew that it was going to be a difficult evening. Stephanie's parents would need a lot of reassurance and support now. The officer remembered, "There was suddenly a loud banging and ringing at the door, which concerned me greatly. Warren was heading for the door, and I shouted to him to leave it. I'd answer it. But it was too late. The door was already open, and there on the doorstep was Stephanie." The message that Stephanie was back home safe and well was relayed to police headquarters. The police began interviewing residents, and a neighbour recalled seeing a red Metro pull up outside his house the previous evening. He saw a girl getting out backwards. Police also found where Kevin Watts had dropped off the money. The extortionist had been on the bed of an abandoned railway line known as the Dove Valley Trail. It runs to another bridge 3 miles away, the one where the painted brick and strange container had been found in the Julie Dart case. Here again they found a dummy device with silver paint on it. A length of washing line had been used to pull the money up. Stephanie was debriefed over a period of 8 days. As she recounted her ordeal, the police discovered that she was an extremely easy person to interview. She was very cooperative, and she'd been able to remember things in great detail. She recalled waking up on the first morning to the sound of Radio 2. A few minutes later, at about 8 a.m., the man returned to the room. He pulled her out of her coffin and offered to make some porridge. She remembered hearing a ping, which must have been a microwave. She lay on a mattress for most of that day and heard people coming and going, holding brief conversations with the man. At some point, she became aware of a dog inside the premises. The man later told her that he had a 6-month-old Alsatian bitch. Stephanie thought the room was used as some sort of work area because she often heard the sounds of banging and hammering. The building smelled of damp, oil and grease. On the final night of her captivity, when the man allowed her to sleep on a mattress, over the top of her blindfold, she managed to see a single wooden beam on the ceiling. She also remembered hearing a telephone ring, and although it rang only 2 or 3 times, she was certain it was an old-fashioned one. And from time to time she heard another bell, which sounded a bit like that of an old-fashioned cash register. About a week after Stephanie's release, the kidnapper sent his final letter. He called it The Facts. This was to be his downfall. It began, "I, being the kidnapper of Stephanie Slater, am not the killer of Julie Dart. It is impossible that there can be any positive connection between the 2 cases. I am also not the person who idiotically tried to blackmail British Rail. The idea was a variation of an idea I had discussed with another. I now believe that he may have used my word processor to make his demands." The letter went on to explain how he had dropped Stephanie off and how sorry he was for what had happened. It had been posted in Barnsley on Wednesday the 5th of February and copied 8 times. Those in receipt included Lynn Dart, West Yorkshire and West Midlands Police, BBC Television, Yorkshire Television, and the News of the World and Sun newspapers. The police knew immediately that the letter was genuine. It contained spelling mistakes like those in the Julie Dart letters, and now proved that there was a link between all 3 crimes. Once Stephanie's debriefing was over, and all the available information had been analysed, a press conference was arranged for Thursday morning the 20th of February. And that evening, Crimewatch UK broadcast a special appeal. Sitting at home watching Crimewatch that night were Michael Sams and his wife Tina. After a few minutes, Mr. Sams remarked to Tina that the kidnapper could almost be him, and she replied, "It's a good job you've got a tin leg." He warned her that the police would be checking everyone with a red car, and that if they turned up, she was not to worry. About 100 miles away, in Keighley, West Yorkshire, Susan Oak returned home about 11 p.m. She had seen all the publicity about the kidnapping, and a nagging idea that the man might be her ex-husband, Michael Sams. She had seen him only a few days earlier at his father's funeral. He had been driving a red Metro that day. For her own peace of mind, she was keen to see Crimewatch, and earlier her son had videotaped the programme for her. As soon as she got in, she sat down to watch, and when she heard the voice, she was stunned. Susan could not get through to the studio because the lines were jammed. Over 1,300 calls were received that night. Instead, she rang her local police station, Keighley, and was put through to the Milgarth incident room in Leeds. Susan gave police the name Michael Sams and told them that he had a small red car, ran a power tools business from a workshop in Newark, and was passionately interested in railways. Her call was one of a number that needed to be checked, and officers visited her at home later that night to take down more details. The next morning, Detective Tim Grogan and Detective Constable Greenwood drove for about an hour before they arrived at Mr. Sam's home, Eve's Cottage in Sutton-on-Trent. When the detectives walked through the door, their eyes were drawn to the railway memorabilia plastered all over the walls. In one room was a word processor. Outside was an Alsatian dog. Tina Sams explained that her husband worked at T&M Tools in Newark. His workshop backed onto the River Trent, and to one side was Newark Castle. As the policeman approached the premises, everything was just as Stephanie had described it. A red Metro was parked outside. The name T&M Tools was written in stencil, like a number of the letters they had received. And there was a notice saying "Closed Wednesday," which was crucial, because all the activities associated with the crimes had taken place on a Wednesday. To enter the premises, they had to open a heavy wooden door that was on sliding metal runners, again, just as Stephanie had remembered. Inside was a large room divided into sections, a front showroom, a counter area, a small utility room, and at the back, a dark, dingy storage area. Above, on the ceiling, was a single wooden beam. The detective saw an old telephone, a microwave, and a radio tuned to Radio 2. The only thing that was not apparent was the old till that Stephanie had heard. But then a door opened, and they could hear the bell. Michael Sams was arrested and taken to Newark Police Station. Once inside, he confessed to kidnapping Stephanie, but denied the murder of Julie Dart. Michael Benjamin Sams was born in Keighley, West Yorkshire, in 1941. He went to Riddlesden Church of England School, where he excelled in most subjects except English. His spelling was poor, and it was later believed that he suffered from dyslexia. He passed the 11+ exam, and after gaining O and A-level passes, went on to study at Hull Nautical College. When he was 19, he joined the Merchant Navy and spent 3 years travelling the world. In the early 1960s, he returned to Keighley, where he met and married his first wife, Susan Oak. And in 1967, he started his own central heating business. During the early 1970s, Michael Sams was struck by a sudden illness. He seemed to undergo a personality change, and furious rows followed. As a result, the marriage came under considerable strain, and 3 years later it ended in divorce. Around this time he was charged with driving a stolen car and imprisoned. It was while he was in prison that he started seeing Jane, whom he later married. That marriage lasted 3 years. Subsequently, the Black & Decker tool company for which he worked was reducing staff in Leeds, and Michael Sams was asked if he would consider moving to Birmingham. He was happy to accept the transfer. Once he had moved, he met Tina, who was to become his third wife. Then he set up his own company, Peterborough Power Tools, and later T&M Tools in Newark. As soon as Michael Sams was arrested, his workshop was sealed off and the long search for forensic evidence began. Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor recalls, "It must have gone through Sam's mind that we were going to find evidence that would link him with the Julie Dart murder, because next morning he called for the interviewing officers and changed his story. He said, "One of the things I said at the start that no one has picked up is that the £20,000 was for another's help." The police did not believe this new tale. And evidence was beginning to build up. At Michael Sam's workshop, forensic experts had found, among other things, a long strand of hair and an old curtain that had a bloodstain on it. The blood was subsequently shown to be of the same group as Julie's and different from that of Michael Sam's, his wife, and Stephanie Slater. Some mustard-coloured tufts of carpet fibres turned out to be indistinguishable from the fibres and tufts recovered from the sheet and rope that had been used to wrap Julie's body. The police questioned him at length about the fibres, but his explanation was simple. The sheet and rope must have been in his workshop at one time, but his accomplice had taken them. The day after his arrest, Sams had agreed to provide a sample of his handwriting, and this had been sent away for comparison with the letters received earlier in the inquiry. Meanwhile, back in the interview room, the police put to Michael Sams details that had emerged from the letter called The Facts, posted a week after Stephanie's release. Sams had admitted to writing the letter. A bizarre exchange took place. "In a previous letter," the interviewing officer said to Sams, "you said that you know the man that murdered Julie Dart and tried to extort money from British Rail." "That's correct," said Sams. "Is this the same man that's got all the money from the Slater kidnap, your accomplice?" the policeman asked. "It is, yes," Sams confirmed. "But you've always said that these cases could never be linked with the Stephanie Slater case. You've always been adamant about that." "Yes," Sams said. "But now you're saying the cases are linked," said the police interviewer. "Now they can be linked," Sams stated. He was then questioned about the handwritten letters. The expert to whom they'd been sent, who had analysed the letters addressed to the Julie Dart inquiry and the sample of Michael Sam's own handwriting, was certain that he was the author of all the letters. Detective Sergeant Tim Grogan began, "Those samples have been examined by a forensic scientist, and it is his opinion that you wrote the York letter and the Coventry one." "No, I'm sorry," Sams replied. "He's examined them and says you wrote them," Grogan persisted. "Well, if he's right, but I say I didn't," said Sams. "There are 14 identical spelling mistakes. How do you account for that?" "I've no explanation at all." After this interview, Michael Sams went away, thought about it, and then changed his story. He admitted that he had lied. "So you did write the letters?" Grogan asked. "Yes, I did. I was used. My accomplice made me write them. He was using me for a pillock." "But why did you do it?" "It seemed like a good idea at the time." The evidence against Michael Sams was now overwhelming. First, he had finally admitted to writing the letters. Second, fibres from his workshop matched those found with Julie's body. Third, the computer in his home had on it information relating to a prostitute called Julie D., along with details relating to the British Rail blackmail and the Stephanie Slater kidnap. Mr. Sams thought he'd deleted these files, but experts managed to retrieve them. Fourth, the silver paint common to both cases was distributed mainly through model shops. Samples were traced back to a shop in Newark. Then tests revealed that the same paint had been used on Michael Sam's motorcycle and on part of his model railway set. However, on the subject of his accomplice, his story never changed. It was his main defense. If detectives could only find the money, this part of his story would be destroyed once and for all. In the months that followed the arrest of Michael Sams, the investigation team had never been able to prove any link between him and Julie's body. They went back through all the witnesses' statements again and discovered that a farmer had seen a red car near the spot where her body was found. He was re-interviewed, and although he could not describe the man himself, he recalled two people who could. They remembered that the man limped and had a stick. This information was put to Mr. Sams, but he denied it all at first. An identity parade failed to pick him out, but afterwards he admitted to being in a place called Stoke Summit, just a mile and a half from where Julie's body was found. Detectives asked him what he was doing there. He said he was train spotting on his day off, one Wednesday sometime after Stephanie's release. He even remembered what the weather was like, dull and rainy. He was helping the police more than he realized. Detective Sergeant Tim Grogan recalls, "We checked the weather forecast, and the only day it could have been was Wednesday the 19th of February, the day before Crimewatch UK. My suspicions were immediately aroused. He knew that the television appeal was about to happen and that we were closing in on him. So he wanted to move the money. My hunch was that this was where he buried it." The search started on the next Tuesday, and ground-probing radar equipment was booked for 3 days. Detectives felt certain that the money was there somewhere, but were not confident that they would find it in the short time available. However, on the final day, when spirits were flagging, they found a box 8 inches below the surface of the earth. Packaged in a Black & Decker parts tray, about the size of a seed tray, was the money. Identical trays had been found in Michael Sam's workshop. The following morning, when Michael Sams read about the find in the papers, he punctured the detectives' pleasure. He informed them that they had unearthed only half the money. A forensic scientist confirmed this. The money had been packaged up in a certain way, exactly as the killer of Julie Dart had requested, and all the £50 notes were missing. Sams told police that his accomplice had buried the other half of the money quite close to where he had buried his own share. So they went back to Stoke Summit. After only 3 hours, they found a patch of soft ground 16 feet away from the first find. This time, the money they uncovered had been packed into an ice cream carton and placed inside a Black & Decker bag. For Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor and his team, it was one of the greatest moments of the whole inquiry. It completely destroyed the fiction of an accomplice. If there had been a second man, he would have had plenty of opportunity, 9 months in fact, to return and collect the money. During the 18 months since his arrest, West Yorkshire Police had compiled a substantial case against Michael Sams. The charges were blackmailing British Rail, the abduction and kidnap of Stephanie Slater, and the murder of Julie Dart. The prosecution case lasted for nearly 3 weeks. In his defence, Mr. Sams gave evidence, but he refused to name his accomplice and denied that he had had anything to do with Julie Dart's death. On Thursday, the 8th of July, 1993, after retiring for just 3 hours, the jury returned their verdict. Michael Sams was found guilty on every charge and given 4 life sentences. Once in prison, just 4 days after the trial, he finally admitted killing Julie Dart. He had seen a picture in a newspaper that showed Lynn Dart beside her daughter's grave, but the headstone had no date. Sams wanted to record what had happened to Julie and the date on which he had killed her. He showed no remorse. End of Side 1.